We've heard from the economists, politicians, and statisticians, but what's really happening with real people after many weeks of lockdown? Scott Theriault is here to discuss it, and it all starts right now.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Scott Theriault's last appearance on this podcast was episode number 283, which aired on February 1st. This is episode number 298, airing on May 16th, Victoria Day weekend. So that's 3.5 months since we've seen Mr. Theriault, and that's because we had this big virus which shut down everything, so we couldn't record in our Toronto office. In fact, we did record a podcast on March 17th, just before we shut the office to in-person meetings, so you'll get to see that episode sometime in June or July. But today, let's talk about what's happening on the ground. So Scott, welcome back. This is the first time I think you and I have done a show via Zoom. So how are you? What's happening?
Good. Hey, has anything happened since the 17th of March? Imagine having been in a coma since then, and you wake up and you're like, whoa, like, what's going on? Yeah, so I'm in the office at 8 King and Yonge. There's nobody down here except me and the security guard. I'm also in the soundproof podcast studio, so this is like being in a bank vault. It's like, and I've been home with 2 kids for 2 months, and so it's hard to adjust to silence, but it's great. Yeah,
and I think that's why you're happy to be in the office today, because you didn't have to be there, but since everything's deserted, then why not get away for the kids and get there? So so that's fantastic. I would love to be in the secret room with you, but hopefully we can do that sooner rather than later. So we are still open, but we're not seeing anybody in person. How's that working out?
Remarkably well. First of all, kudos to you and Ted for getting everybody organized within a couple of days, because that must have been a hell of a back-breaking amount of work. But we all got home on the 18th of March, and we were functioning pretty much as normal the next day. So I'm meeting with people every day. We're doing consults, follow-ups, counseling, sign-ups, all the things we would normally do. We're just doing it by video and or phone. And I know I, for one, have learned tons about technology that I didn't know about, not only Zoom, but HelloSign, how to do electronic signatures. We are still fully open and signing people. No difference except not in person. And that's the funny thing about this, is that we're able to function even though the courts are closed, because the kinds of files that we do, whether they're bankruptcies or proposals, are summary in nature. And in Canada, the insolvency system is very easy in terms of the amount of work it takes to do it. You know, it's not involved. There's no lawyers. You don't go to court like in the States. It's not litigious. So that allows us to keep filing people and keep helping people. So we're rocking and rolling.
Yeah, and what people watching don't know is that microphone you've got set up there isn't actually doing anything. It's purely a prop because we don't know how to connect. I got my fancy microphone.
Let's do a sound check.
Yeah. Did it make any difference? That's
different. No, it's just
no difference. But it's a good prop. It looked good there. So the people who are listening to this,
kind of in my way though, so this is better actually.
Yeah, the people who are listening to this on the podcast and not watching on YouTube have no idea what we're talking about. So okay, let's get to the business at hand here, which is what's going on. That is the question. What is going on? What are you seeing? So you've already mentioned that you are, and we're recording this on Wednesday, May the 13th. It's about 4:00 in the afternoon. You've been in the Toronto office all day at King and Yonge, and Toronto is deserted. Is that correct?
I got down here in 21 minutes from Bloor West Village. So that's nearly impossible unless you have the jetpacks we were promised when I was a kid. But that's pretty cool. But it's not cool when you're down here because it doesn't feel right. Things are closed up. The streets are empty. The buildings are empty. It's dead silent except for the odd siren. And it's a bit sad. Because you think of all the people that are down here normally, and so it's a bit of a shock to the system. But I've done consults with people all day, counselings. I even did a conference, an investment conference recording today. So functioning is same. It's just a bit of a weird vibe.
Yeah, and the other problem is you and I have horrible haircuts because we haven't been able to get our hair cut, and we're all looking somewhat disheveled, but we were never beautiful to begin with, so it doesn't really matter.
No.
What are you seeing stress level wise?
Right. So the first 3 weeks, so when I got home on March 18th and started taking 10, 12 calls a day, because it certainly was that many, people were freaked out because of widespread job loss. And when you lose your job suddenly, and talking people who've had their jobs for a long time, very secure, and then gone. So that freaks people out because unemployment is the real. You can't fake unemployment. Like it's the worst thing that can happen to you financially, pretty much. And normally when we see people, they've already done their soul searching. They've gone through the process of whether it's denial or, kicking the can down the road, using other means to hold off their creditors. It's usually a 12 to 24 month process. So we don't, as I say, we don't use our Kleenex boxes too often in our offices. Okay. They're there, but it's more of a prop. And whereas this was like being a 911 financial 911 for 3 weeks straight, 10, and we weren't filing very many people. We were just guiding them through how to, make it through the next few weeks. When's your rent coming due? Have you taken advantage of this? Have you changed banks? That kind of advice, temporary emergency advice. But the stress level has changed dramatically in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I think. You probably agree because you meet with people too.
I do. And I think you're right. It was the initial stress was, we don't know what's going to happen. We've never been in this before. We got to work from home. We've lost our job, whatever. And I think now that it's been going on for a couple of months, very close to a couple of months, it's become the new normal. So, okay, I'm working from home. I mean, we know that almost 8 million people are getting or have applied for the CERB benefit. So at least there is something coming in. Maybe it's not quite enough to pay all their expenses, but at least they've got enough for food, basic shelter, that sort of thing. So that immediate pressure has gone and everybody else is in the same boat. Like you said, you're in downtown Toronto and there's nobody else there. You got the whole city to yourself. So what's happening to me is happening to everyone else as well. So I'm kind of resigned to it. And gradually, I think people are starting to come back. So I mean, I opened this up on Twitter for about half an hour before we started recording, and I said, "Hey, what questions do people have? Let me, without giving Scott any chance to prepare, what questions do you want?" And one person asked, "When or how will it get better?" That's an interesting question. And I guess the answer is, well, part of it will be when the economy starts opening up, but I think there are a number of businesses that will not reopen.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at the types of people that we've taken calls from, there's definitely a pattern, right? Like versus what we would normally see. And so the sad part is a lot of those people are going to be faced with their jobs not only being temporarily lost, but permanently, because either the industry is hit so badly by this, it's not something that people's psyches are going to be able to handle when they go when everybody's released to go back in the economy. And so the unknown sucks, especially financially.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions that Paul on Twitter had asked. What sense are you getting from non-essential workers who are still at home? Because obviously essential workers, hospital workers, whatever, are still working. What sense are you getting from non-essential workers who are still at home about how many of them are concerned that they do not have jobs to return to? I guess that's the point you're making about uncertainty.
Yeah, so if those people phoned us in the first month that we were off, that was the biggest thing, right? Is okay, well, the unknown isn't good for filing insolvencies, because an insolvency proceeding is, once it starts, you can't stop it. You can't take a mulligan. So if you start a bankruptcy, whether it's 9 months, 21, if you do a proposal, which is 5 years, you don't really want to enter into that until you have a bit of certainty about what the next year, 2, 3 is going to look like. Because I mean, it'd be easier for me to say to somebody, "Oh yeah, just do a proposal, you'd be fine." But then what if they don't have their job to go back to? Because right now, you don't have to do anything because you're creditor proof, essentially, right? The courts are closed. Well, you're getting CERB benefit, which can't even be garnished anyway. So, you got a couple of months to kind of figure things out and see if you got a job to go back to or not. And uncertainty is terrible, right? I think people were most freaked out about that because a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck in this country. And if you don't have that paycheck coming suddenly, like we had people calling the first 5 days of the shutdown, like it wasn't even a missed paycheck yet, and they were freaking out. And I think people have gotten so ingrained in a pattern of pay, spend, pay, spend, pay, spend, with no cushion of savings of any kind. So those who don't know about their jobs going back, like I talked to a guy who works in the airline industry, flight attendant guy today, right? What's he going to do? He's got 21 years in with Air Canada, and so that's good seniority, but they might only need 30% of their flight attendants back for a while because it might be staggered, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's a huge issue. And, I'm sure there's some people listening to this go, well, it serves you right for not having an emergency fund. You should have had an emergency fund. Well, guess what? When you make $2,500 a month and it costs you $2,500 a month to live, there has been no capacity to generate savings. And why would you have savings when interest rates are low? If I put money in the bank, I'm not earning anything. I'm better off having a line of credit or something at 3% interest. That becomes my emergency savings. And that's why what we've been telling people is exactly what you just said, that you don't need to file yet if you're not working, if your wages can't be garnished. Let's get ready, but let's wait until you're back to work to actually make the decision. And that's why, much to the amazement of a lot of the talking heads in the media, the insolvency rate in March was, essentially unchanged. I think, I got the numbers in front of me here. Consumer insolvencies declined in Ontario by 1.8%. Bankruptcies were down by 14%. Proposals were up by 4%. Relatively flat, which is after a number of months where they were going up, 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 and up. That's because there was a shutdown right in the middle of March. Well, guess what? The month of April, the month of May, probably the month of June, I'm predicting we will see something like a 50% decline in the number of insolvencies for the reasons that you just said, that people aren't working and therefore they don't need to file yet. Now, whether they'll need to file in 3 months or 6 months, well, I guess that's what we'll see. Now, here's a question from Depeche that came in on Twitter as well. How cautious should one be? If one has recently been pre-approved for a line of credit, is it a good idea to accept it for future planning, or due to the economic environment, bank might request to pay it back, and then to backfill, people need to get another loan or high interest loan? So if it's there, should you grab it? What are your thoughts?
Well, it depends what you mean by grab it. I guess, if you take it all out, if you say, okay, they're giving me $5,000, I don't know, just use $5,000 take the whole $5,000 out. Okay, well, if you're going to do that, put it in a different bank so that it's not touchable by the bank that has lent it to you, and keep that as your emergency fund. You can always pay it back when you need to, I guess. I mean, I don't want to advise people to take on debt, but these are also unprecedented times. And so if you are one of those people who has no savings and you're in an industry that is not likely to come back, and you got a family and you got rent or a mortgage, you know what? If you've got access to something, I would give it a good long think. But the only issue is if you don't take the money out, the bank might change their mind in a month or two when they report their next earnings, because they're going to get slaughtered, right? So it's hard to stay on that one.
Yeah, and if you do take the money out, well, then you're paying interest on it, and if you don't need the money, you're paying interest. So did you have to actually, do anything better? There was an interesting thread on Twitter a few days ago by Ron Butler, the mortgage guy who you know well, and he's been on this podcast. And it was a scenario where somebody was applying for a mortgage, and I'll probably get the facts totally wrong here, so sorry, Ron, if I'm butchering it, but you can go to Ron, the mortgage guy's Twitter feed and look at it. But the basic gist of it was, guy was applying for a mortgage. He was working, so he had to prove his income. Bank wanted to see copies of bank statements and everything. And when they looked at the bank statements, his paychecks were coming in as per normal, but so was the CERB. The CERB was coming in, $2,000 a month as well. And so when the bank questioned him about it, he said, "Oh, well, I applied for it because I figure, it's there. Might as well grab it." And the bank said, "You know what? That's fraud. You're working. You're obviously not eligible for the CERB. We're denying you the mortgage." But he didn't get the mortgage. So I think the CERB is a good example of something that has, two prongs to it. Yes, if you're not working, if you're eligible for it, you should definitely be applying for it. But there are unintended consequences, such as that one. And of course, it's fully taxable.
Yes.
So how many people are going to get the CERB for 4 months, $8,000? They're in a 20% tax bracket. Well, guess what? Next year, they're going to owe $1,600 in taxes. I worry that since the government has paid out $30 billion on the CERB already, there may be a huge amount built up. that's perhaps an unintended consequence of what's going to
I think CRA is going to be pretty busy this time next year. There's going to be an awful lot of people. Like, I've had people say, I'm on CERB. Is that gross or net?
Yeah,
right.
You don't know.
It's gross, dude. Like, and so, like you said, in 4 months time, that's $8,000. Okay. Well, $8,000 is a pretty significant chunk of money to be taxable if you didn't think it was going to be. Yep. And so if you've got all these other debts and now you got a couple of thousand owing in taxes next spring, you might be in a bit of trouble. Plus, like somebody mentioned to me today, X million people have gotten CERB, and like something like half of those people or something like that were eligible, or 2/3. So there's all these CERBs going out. Like it's a massive amount. It was much bigger than I thought.
Well, I can tell you, as of May 10th, there were 7.83 million unique applicants. There were 11.3 million applications received. So a difference between applications and unique applicants. Now, some of that would be because people were applying both to Service Canada and to CRA, so there was a bit of confusion. I mean, if you want a wild prediction for the future, what happens in the fall when the government looks and goes, oh my goodness, our federal deficit is $200 billion because of all this money we've spent and because tax revenues dropped? We got to start recovering some of that. Why don't we figure out who got the CERB that shouldn't have got it? So how could you go about doing that? Well, it would be pretty easy for the government to run a list of everybody who got the CERB and then run a list of, when T4s come out, for example, in January, to compare how many people got the CERB and how many of those people had their income drop by whatever the equivalent of 2 or 3 months worth would be. And if your income didn't drop and you got the CERB, well, that would be the one where the government sends you a letter saying, hey, by the way, can you send us copies of your pay stubs? In fact, they may just do that for everybody. They may say in September, send us all your pay stubs from January through September. We want to confirm that you weren't working and therefore were eligible for the CERB. And if it turns out you got this inadvertently, here's the way you can give us the money back, so no harm, no foul.
Yeah. And here's another little wrench for the system. What if we all are released into the economy in the next month or two and they open things up and there's a second wave? Then the government's going to go, okay, hold on a second. Everybody's just lost their jobs again, or the ones who have gone back to work maybe have lost their jobs again. So now you got a second wave of benefits potentially to look at, and they're already sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars spent, right? Like, who knows what they're going to have to do, right? So that's another unknown.
Yep. And you're right. Unknown is the whole problem here. And I think your advice and my advice is exactly the same. And that is, keep your expenses as low as you can, keep your powder dry, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
And bank somewhere safe, right? If you owe a ton of money to your bank, get a bank account somewhere else for now and have CERB put in there or whatever you get, just to make sure that you don't have any more catastrophes. Because if the bank decides one day, okay, we just reported our second quarter and like it's bad, and they're going to pull a lever and say everybody under whatever we're going to take the money out of their accounts, then you're going to you're going to have no money for rent and food again. So, and prioritize what you let go, right? Maybe for all those credit card debts, like I've heard people as recently as today saying that their bank is letting them, they're writing off 50% of the interest, or maybe they just pay half the payment or something. Take advantage of those. But even you can even stop paying them, maybe pay one every 2 months. If you're in such a cash flow position that you have to buy groceries, well, obviously something's got to go. So just take some steps for now and then see what happens, right?
Yeah, and we are big believers in having a bank account where you don't owe money. Yes. Because if you get behind on your credit card payment and you figure you're going to be back to work in a couple of months and everything's going to be good, the bank says, yeah, no problem, we'll give you the deferral, it's all good. But you're right. What happens if next month they don't want to give you the deferral? If they change their mind and they want to catch up for a couple of months, better not to have the money there. So that's just a simple planning point. So I want to ask you a couple of questions about real estate, because of course that's the big question everybody wants to ask. So Paul had sent in a question on Twitter. What percentage of homeowner debtors that you are hearing from cannot make their mortgage loan payments? Do they have multiple loans? Any distressed home sellers? Are they rolling the dice, holding off on listing? Any distressed landlords who are not collecting? So basically a generic real estate question. Now, I will throw in the plug right now for the Hoyes Michaelis Homeowners Bankruptcy Index, which is something we publish every month. And you can go on the internet. I'll put a link in the show notes over on YouTube for that. What that shows is that so far, homeowners are not yet going bankrupt. I think the most recent reading was like 6.5%, meaning only 6% of our clients are filing an insolvency, a bankruptcy or a consumer proposal at the time they own a house. And that's understandable because house prices have gone up so much that people haven't been getting into trouble if they've been a homeowner for a period of time. What are you hearing real estate wise, landlord wise, distress sellers, anything like that?
Sure. Okay. So in that first month that we were home and fielding all of those kind of emergency financial 911 calls, the one thing that was very noticeable was, as you said, our homeowner index right now is 6-7%. So only 6 or 7% of people before this who called us for help were homeowners. It's almost entirely renters, and even more so in this particular office. But I would say 20 to 30% in the first 3 weeks that I talked to were homeowners or condo owners, right? Because widespread unemployment that is sudden, especially, does not care a whiff if you're a homeowner or a renter, right? Like, people just get wiped out from their jobs because of a worldwide economic catastrophe. And so all of a sudden, the playing field between renters and homeowners evens up quite a bit. And so I expect what we're going to see is we were going to see more homeowners anyway, even if this never happened. Organically, over the last decade, for the amount of consumer debt that's been built up and the bubble that's there, eventually, yeah, the renters have to file sooner, but the homeowners are going to have to file at some point, especially if the banks are starting to tighten up, because they were anyway. But now with this thing, I think what you're going to see is a lot higher homeowner index a lot sooner than we had thought it would be. So instead of 2021, 2022, you're going to see homeowners coming in here end of this year kind of thing, because if you can't pay your mortgage for 2 or 3, 4 months, I think 6 is the max. Well, I don't know what the bank's plan is beyond that, but banks aren't super generous. So at some point, something's got to happen, right? And banks, yeah, they don't want to be homeowners. I get that. But they also don't want to be letting people not pay their mortgages for half a year.
Yeah. And the other big factor here is we've all been working from home for the last 2 months. And for some of us, it's actually worked out fairly well.
Yes.
We're recording this at 4:00 in the afternoon on Wednesday. It was sunny out there. So I went out for a quick run before I came back. That's why I'm all red still here. We're getting used to it. Well,
Yeah.
If I can work from home, do I need to live in that little condo in downtown Toronto?
Yeah.
Or can I live 2 hours outside of the city and commute in, 1 or 2 days every couple of weeks?
Yeah.
That obviously has an impact on real estate prices as well. So I think there's a number of different factors. And obviously, Ben Rabideau has been on this show, Ron Butler, Rachel, talking about how it's impacting landlords and tenants and renters and that sort of thing. There's going to be a lot of disjointedness happening as a result of what's
going on. There is. Somebody in the States the last couple of days did a comparison for cities like LA or New York, where here's what you get in the city. And if you're able to work from home now, here's what you could get in these 5 different neighborhoods. And it was shocking, right? And I mean, everybody kind of knows that, but when you actually put a real estate image to it, and amount and the value, and living in a 3,000 square foot home with 2 acres instead of a 2,000 square foot condo or 1,500 square foot condo. So I think a lot of people are going to start to make decisions about that longer term once it's safer to do so and things are a bit more known, right? I look at these empty buildings down here today, and I think, BMO said last week or week before that 80% of their people weren't going to be going back to the office. Wow, right? There's going to be entire floors empty.
Yeah, entire buildings, and they got a huge. Well, obviously, all the big banks within a 4-minute walk of where you're sitting right now have tons of space. So, a couple more real estate questions. Nick has asked: is the FTHBI program a good deal for FTHBs? Which, of course, means is the first-time home buyers incentive program a good deal? I think the answer probably is, gee, I wonder what's going to happen with real estate. Because if real estate is sort of at a top right now and it's going to ease off over the next year or two, then probably if you can wait, you can wait. Michelle has asked, I want to know about refinancing mortgages after this mess. Any recommendations? Mine will be up in a few months, and I'm wondering what my next steps should or could be. Well, it's unlikely interest rates are going up anytime soon, but you've got this element of your employment situation. So I think, and kind of you're really saying the same thing, there will be a number of people who may decide, you know what, my mortgage is coming up for renewal in 6 months. Maybe what I should do is just sell now, go rent somewhere outside of the city where things are cheaper, maybe buy back into the market in the future. Now, we don't know anything about real estate. You and I aren't market timers. So we, don't be taking advice from us on that. But is that the general sense that you're getting from people?
Yeah, I think people are talking generically about a rethink, right? This is pretty jolting for everybody. This is going to be the economic event of your lifetime, unless something worse comes down the road. It's hard to see, but this is the kind of event that changes people, right? Or it should. Maybe we're so spoiled after 10 years of free money and housing boom and stock market boom, because I have seen stuff as recently today. I think it was I can't remember who it was, sorry, but talking about, it was Alexander McQueen talking about how people refer to using a line of credit to buy something as cash. Well, it is, but it's not your cash, right? But I think that's kind of, our minds have been trained to think of credit as cash. And, if you're home right now and you're lucky enough to be working, you are saving a ton, especially if you got young kids in daycare, even if you haven't, like transport costs and all this stuff, like, people who are still working and are lucky enough to are finding that, wow, I got some money, right? And that really is, it really is an epiphany, right? To realize how much you're blowing getting to work and paying daycare and all the costs that come around working physically somewhere else, right?
Yeah, and I think that's been the biggest shock, because you and I have talked to a lot of people, and as everyone know, if you file a bankruptcy or consumer proposal, there are 2 credit counseling sessions that are part of that. So you're doing a lot of them. I did one an hour or two ago, and the lady said to me, yeah, I'm amazed, and everybody has said the same thing to me. I'm amazed at how much less I am spending, because when I went to the office, I'd stop at the coffee shop, I'd go down to the food court, I do this, I do that. I might, pick up an extra shirt or pair of pants or something because, oh, well, I was out there and I didn't really need it, but I was out there. Whereas now, it's you're just not spending that kind of money. And if you go a couple of months without spending money on those sorts of things, you might start to realize, okay, maybe some of those things I didn't actually need to be spending on.
Yeah.
It may make a permanent change, or maybe there'll be all this pent up demand when we get back. I don't know.
Well, I think there'll be an element of that anyway. Like, I mean, there's going to be a percentage of people who just go out and go nuts, right? But I think a large percentage of people are going to have a good rethink about everything after this. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not a bad thing. And I spoke to a person today, and I won't give any of the details because it's not relevant, but the industry that she works in is sort of like our industry. It was, you always meet with people face to face. It's a medical type thing. Well, the doctor she works for has been able to do a lot more stuff using Zoom video, and it's actually worked out pretty good. So I think that's another example of the rethink that is happening. One more point on credit limits, which I think this is also an interesting one. I think it was Ben Rabideau who had put this on Twitter, that some people are seeing their credit limits on credit cards and lines of credit reduced because they are getting the CERB. So again, your bank can look in your bank account and they can see pretty easily, oh, look, that $2,000 line came in. So that's going to trigger the algorithm to do a quick hit on your credit report and go, oh, maybe your credit line that we've authorized for $10,000 needs to be knocked back to 5, or maybe knocked back to whatever you're borrowing.
Yeah.
Just because they authorized it last week doesn't mean it's going to be the same this week.
Yeah, like I don't expect banks to be calling credit lines for everybody. They're not going to blow their own heads off. But there are little things they can do like that where if you've spent a number of years with that available and you still think it is, and they change the rules because they can, banks don't banks don't do stuff they can't do legally. So don't, for everybody who sends me notes saying, can they really do that legally? Yeah, you know what? Banks don't banks make sure that everything's vetted. Okay, so if they're doing it, they can do it. And so, maybe you didn't read page 7, but because who does? But that's probably where it is. And they probably say, yeah, at any time we can limit the amount of credit exposure we have based on a number of elements, blah blah blah. They probably don't even say them, but like you said, well, there's one, right? That, all of a sudden there's money coming in there from the government. Okay, well, so banks know a lot of stuff, and we're all busy, but they're in there doing this all the time, and so they're keeping an eye on things.
Yep. You never know what's going to happen. So now I know you've got another couple of appointments left today, so I don't want to keep you on here any longer, other than to ask you a final question, and that is, okay, so what else have we not talked about? And maybe final question would be around the types of people that you are seeing, were seeing, have things changed? Is there anything else to add on that point?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention like some of the industries that we've been seeing that have been impacted the most, right? So anybody who does service, personal, like food service, even medical service in person, that kind of stuff, they have been affected tremendously. Anybody in entertainment. I mean, I'm downtown Toronto, so I've heard from a lot of people who are either actors, performers, musicians, whatever, even people who do, weddings. Hey, guess what? It's June next month. Okay. How many weddings are going to get canceled? How many people's major stream of revenue is gone for the year, right? And, anybody that's in touch with people physically, right? Massage therapists, maybe yoga instructors, although you can do that by Zoom. Like you mentioned, your doctor, I'm sure there's people that are working around these things. But anyone who physically touches somebody right now is going to be on at least a delay. Now, maybe the dentist will go crazy once they open things up because people's teeth are hurting and whatever. But I still think there's going to be an element of wariness where it's like, I'll go if I absolutely need to, but maybe if I otherwise would have gone, I won't. Anybody in contracting who visits people's homes. So if you make your living going to somebody's house and repairing things, like nobody's having people in their house right now, right? And so those are the kind of industries, the airlines, like I said this morning, right? Where there's an awful lot of people employed there who are just happen to be in industries that, the delay is going to be long in the thing coming back. Maybe if there's a second wave, it's going to be even worse for them. I mean, I've even had people say, I'm getting right out of this industry, whatever it is, because I can't handle this kind of risk anymore, right? I'd rather just be doing something where, it doesn't, my livelihood doesn't depend on something I can't control happening all of a sudden.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we are going to see a number of businesses that just won't exist anymore. I mean, and even if I'm doing a business like, cutting people's hair, okay, so they let me reopen. I guess I'm going to have to wear a mask. You can't have a beard if you're wearing an N95 mask, I guess. My clients maybe have to wear some kind of mask or something. Maybe I've got to have, better air purification in the building, but then everything's going to have to be sterilized after every client. So now it's a hair salon, fine, you sweep up the hair and off you go. Well, no, we're going to have to actually squirt down the chair, the sink, the scissors, everything. So instead of seeing a client, I don't know, every 45 minutes, every hour, whatever it is, well, you got to build in 15-minute buffer on each one of them. So how does that affect cost? What does that do to things? There's going to be a lot of things to change. So I guess my final concluding comment here is that things are changing and they're going to keep changing. And so we shouldn't just assume that, well, when I get back to work in a month, it'll just be the same as it was before. No, I think things will be completely different. For some people, it will actually be better because, like you said, they've had an epiphany. Maybe there's some money I don't need to be spending. Maybe now is the impetus to change careers. Because if I was doing okay in my career, I wasn't going to change. But now that my restaurant is shut down, well, maybe I will get into something different. So I think that's probably what we're going to see going forward.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that, Scott. I know you got meetings to go to, so we will hopefully be in the same room together. You and I see each other 3 or 4 times a day as it is, because we're dealing with clients over Zoom, so it's great. We get to see each other, but it will be nice to be back in the office again, so I look forward to that. Thanks for doing that.
All right. Thank you, Doug.
Great. Thank you. That was Scott Theriault, and that was our show for today. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.